chart and then ask my colleague to join in. What does it mean? What does it really mean down home? What does it mean out there in the subdivision or in the tenements? What does it mean in America when 95% of all of the wealth created winds up in the hands of 1%? Here's what it means. It means that there's hunger in America. It means that mothers and fathers are not able to have a job that they can provide their children with a meal, with food on the table. It means that in this House of Representatives there will be this day, this week, an effort to provide even more hunger in America. More hunger, more children going without food, as the supplemental food program is slashed by $40 billion. $4 billion a year, 10 years, $40 billion, so that the 1% can have even more. This is not right. This is not right that in this nation we have hunger. It is not America as it should be, and it certainly is not what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said America should be, when the test of our progress is not whether we add more abundance to those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. We have a challenge here in America. We need to change things. We need to change the public policies that would deny food to hungry children, to parents, to our seniors, to our children in schools. It's time for us to put in place policies that create a real economic growth that the working men and women of this nation can share in the economic progress of our nation. And tonight, we're going to spend some time talking about how we can do that. My friend from New York, Paul Tonko.
Well, Representative Garamendi, you have highlighted in a very stark contrast the difference in the thought process and the philosophy of what was then under President FDR, under Franklin Roosevelt, and what is now. And certainly what had happened during the Clinton years, which proved much more progressive in its nature. You know, when we think of that quote of President Roosevelt, where society needed to be tested as to whether or not they were going to add more, add to the abundance of those who have much, that was a tremendous litmus test. It was a challenge to this country to search deep into its moral compass. And what you're highlighting here, Representative Garamendi, is that it's an ebb and flow. It's looking for ways to pay for tax breaks for those who are perched way on the top. And where you talk of that 98% of the growth of the economy going to the top 1%, that's unsustainable. But when you think of the gimmickry that is going on to be able to provide for the cost of such spending, because these tax breaks for those perched on the top is an order of spending, it's done through cuts to programs that speak to hunger, cuts that will impact seniors, cuts that will impact our very young, cuts that will impact our struggling families. Now, there's no mistaking the correlation between tough times and those who are dependent on a number of federal programs. Throughout history, you can suggest through data that are compiled that those charts go upward. When you have tough times, the reliance on several of these programs grows. And it's not unusual that had happened during the recession. And so some struggling families required assistance. But you also have the elderly population that have nutrition inserted as part of their health care formula. It is part of their wellness agenda. If a diabetic does not get the nutritional needs met, there are problems. If there are situations where people are doing without food, it can be the difference between quality of life and sometimes survival because of the absolute need to have a well-balanced nutritional program. And the same is true of our very young. We cannot ask our young children to go without the nutritional values they require, or to ask them to study at their best level in a classroom on an empty belly. So the moral compass is very direct here. It points our way and challenges us to take those words uttered decades ago by President Roosevelt, and they speak with greater resonance, deeper, more profound resonance than they had when they were perhaps first uttered by the late former president. We need to take that to mind. We need to have history speak to us. We need to look at what happened when we invested in America, in her working families, in the toughest of times. When we think of the progress made during those Roosevelt years, there is a gentleman who was challenged in his own right and who led this nation, lifted this nation's economy while serving in a wheelchair. That is a powerful statement, one that had progressive outcomes written all over it. And we need to go forward and look at these orders of investment that will grow the economy, at tax policy that draws fundamental fairness, so that there isn't this gross disparity between growth for some and denial for others. It's absolutely statistically tracked now from as late as far along as the mid to late 70s to today. You can chart what has happened with some of these efforts to reduce assistance to working families and middle-income community. And it is unsustainable. We cannot grow an economy with these sorts of policies in play. And so tonight, let's look at those investments from education to higher education to infrastructure to advanced manufacturing that is required so as to allow us to compete effectively in a global economy where our manufacturing base can survive if we do it smarter, not necessarily cheaper. If we do it smarter, we will land contracts, grow jobs with the productivity factor that's developed by inserting our policies into the transformation into an advanced manufacturing economy, and by providing the investments that will draw policies that are progressive and where resources that will provide a lucrative dividend make them an investment rather than outright spending, as we saw with some of these tax relief measures, which did not produce a growth in the economy and just made life very comfortable for a very relative few. So I think the challenge is before us to go forward and put a sound budget together. None of this kicking the can down the road with continuing resolutions. Let's name the designees to the conference table from each house, from each party. The President has outlined a budget with his administration. The United States Senate has passed its version of a budget. The House has passed its version of a budget. Let's name the participants at the conference table. Let's do it in daylight. Let's flood the lights on the process. Let's show the sharp contrast between various solutions and recommended approaches that will allow the public to be best engaged in the process and to understand the wisdom or lack thereof of some of the moves that are required or requested of us here in the House.
Mr. Tonko.